Good afternoon. My name is Stacia Stelk, and I'm pleased to welcome you to Deep Roots Native Gardening webinar series. Deep Roots is hosting these webinars every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time. To find out about upcoming webinars or to catch up and watch one that you might have missed, please visit our website, deeprootskc.org/stayhomekc. Before we get started, don't forget to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A tool and make comments with its chat feature. At the end of today's presentation, we will take a few minutes to answer some of your most popular questions. This afternoon, Deep Roots is thrilled to have Paula Diaz of GardeNerd Consultations. GardeNerd provides design incorporating native plants into traditional home and business landscapes. Paula is an active partner in Deep Roots and a member of Grow Native. Paula has written articles in numerous publications and is a featured speaker on gardening in our community. Her passion is to create spaces which are ecologically beneficial and to share with others the joy of welcoming nature into our human spaces. Please join me in welcoming Paula Diaz from GardeNerd's Consultation. Great, here you are. Welcome, Paula. So glad to have you. All right, I'm going to stop my sharing so that you can share your slideshow, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Stacia. And this thing doesn't want to work, of course. There we go. Yes. Okay, it's working, yay. We're supposed to be discussing how to plant and maintain trees and shrubs in the most beneficial manner for those living beings that we are planting. 15 to 20 minutes, I could do that probably talking about one plant. So I'm going to try to be fast and try to squeeze in as much as I can. But as far as the maintenance side, that's so often lessened if we do our research ahead of time. So if we look at selecting the proper plant to put into the place where we're going to plant it, or we love the plant and we're going to have to select the proper place for that particular plant. But that will help to reduce down the line the maintenance significantly. So we have to do what so many people forget to do. You buy this cute little shrub in a pot at the nursery and you take it home and you plant it right next to the sidewalk because it's so cute. And then by the next year, it's eating the sidewalk, and 2 years later, you have to cut it out because it's overwhelming. So consider the mature size of whatever tree or shrub you're looking at, not just what it looks like right now. Consider what's around it. Things like sidewalks. How many people have seen knockout roses planted all along a sidewalk and then somebody's got to constantly cut them back because you're going to stab yourself walking next to them? Where is the water source? Are you going to haul the hose out to the second acre or the very end of your yard or however far away it is? Because watering is key to the success of trees and shrubs. And then also consider what's the natural place that that plant would have grown. Is it like a redbud or a dogwood and belongs under the larger shade trees? Is it a canopy tree like a maple or a hickory or an oak tree? Does it form a thicket like a serviceberry or suckering like a wild plum can do? Do you want it to be more of a hedge where you're going to maintain it by trimming it? Those are the kinds of things that you need to take into consideration before you ever pick up your shovel. That way, the maintenance down the road is much, much less. When you're selecting your tree or shrub in the nursery, most of them are going to come in a pot similar to this. This particular one is in really great shape because, and I'm not sure if the pointer works when I do this. Yeah, it does, look. So we've got true roots right here at the surface in this pot. So we know that we don't have to take additional soil off the top of the pot. This pot, on the other hand, has some extra soil on top of it. When we think about these trees and shrubs are started generally from seed or from very small cuttings, and then they get potted up into a larger pot and potted up into a larger pot. And each time the nursery system is doing that, they're adding a little bit more soil on the top. So it's very crucial that we remove any excess soil until we find those true roots down below the surface. This one, I just scraped a very minimal layer off the top, and you can see all these hairy looking roots. That is not what you want to have at the top of your ground surface when you start to plant. This is. Can you see that there's this true root right here where there's actually enough of a coating on it that when I scraped it with my knife, you can see that that's an actual true root. It's not one just of the little fuzzy hairy ones. So that root should end up being at the very surface of the soil. When you're digging your hole and planting, you don't want to put it too deep. These are some mature trees, and you can see how the roots are actually at the very surface of the soil, where we've got this flare at the base of the tree called the root flare. That's supposed to be there. When we think about drawing trees when we're children, and we think about making that little flare down at the bottom, that's supposed to be in our trees. Our trees are not supposed to be planted to look like a telephone pole. And you can see this old guy has the big giant root that was absolutely at the surface and is even growing still above the surface, but the tree is very healthy and very large in size. It's been there a long time, so it's way better to have your trees have those roots at the surface. You don't want to suffocate your trees and keep the oxygen away from them. Another thing that's really crucial to remember is that grass and trees are not the same thing. So a lot of times I've seen people buy these beautiful trees, and sometimes these are the estate-sized trees that they paid all this extra money for this enormous, beautiful tree and paid someone to come and plant it improperly because they put it in there too deeply. And then they allow their irrigation system to take care of the tree from then on and never touch it again. Well, a tree's roots have a whole lot more body to support with what they take in than grass roots do. So we cannot water a tree the same way that we water turf grass and expect it to be a healthy tree. One of the things that I learned from the wonderful and hilarious Chuck Connor from Missouri Department of Conservation is the 5-gallon bucket method. This is one of my buckets next to one of my decently newly planted trees. It was a peach tree that I planted last year. And for 3 years, I will make sure that this tree gets the appropriate water and in the sufficient amount. So this 5-gallon bucket method, you can see where I've circled the little hole that's drilled on the side of the bucket, not on the flat bottom surface where it will get pressed into the soil. It's on the side of the bucket where you are able to have that flow come out, but not too terribly quickly. You don't want a big giant hole. And so what I will do with this bucket is I keep the stone that you can see in the picture inside the bucket, and I leave it next to the tree. If you want your tree to be really good and healthy, be certain that you're giving it 3 or 4 times a week a fill up on that bucket. You can do 2 or 3 times in one day and then another day do another one, or you can do 1 time one day and then skip a day and another time and another. Don't do them all together because that just makes a really big soggy mess. Kind of spread it out. And of course, if we're getting rain, you don't need to do as much. But it's really crucial that we water our trees deeply and less frequently than how we water our turf grass. You can see the purple X on there. I collect a lot of the 5-gallon buckets because of using them for this method, and I love trees and shrubs. So I always mark it so I know that's one that I can't use to carry anything else in because it's got a hole in it. Now, this particular tree is a prime example of the theft that goes on from so many nurseries where they plant your tree too deeply and then they leave it staked because of course they can charge you more to stake it. So they leave it staked even though most trees don't really need to be staked. And then they put mulch on it when they plant it, and then they put mulch on it in the fall, and then they put mulch on it in the spring, and then they put mulch on it in the fall, and no one ever takes off that mulch. And that tree will soon be dead because of having that much mulch on it. We all learn when we're kids that trees give off oxygen from their leaves for us. Actually, they do it for themselves, but we take advantage of that. And where do those trees get that oxygen? They get that oxygen from their root system. And this type of mulch only serves to suffocate the tree. Besides that, the water can't penetrate. Even if it wanted to be holding in moisture, it can't. But where it does hold it is right around the tree's bark, where it's touching the bark. Your mulch should never touch the bark of a tree. So think of skinny bagels instead of these giant mountains or volcanoes of mulch. I prefer to use pine straw. For me, I just love that, number one, it's way easier for me to physically manage handling it, dragging it around, getting it where I want it to be. But also, it has a lot more air movement through it because it never becomes compacted into that hard, crunchy surface like the traditionally ground wood mulches do. So a skinny bagel means in the middle of your mulch, it never touches the trunk. And then it comes out as far as what's called the drip line. So as far as your branches stick out, that's the ideal width of your mulch area. You know, ideal and real are oftentimes very different, but that's the ideal size that we would put around there. The reason for the mulch is, number one, to help keep the tree from having to compete with turf grass. Number two, to help the tree retain moisture when we have those dry spells. And number three, to protect the tree from us humans hitting it with our lawnmowers or our weed eaters, which I might be guilty of myself occasionally. But as you can see, I've got the stone in the bucket. The bucket stays right there for 3 years. Yes, my neighbors might not appreciate it, but my trees really do, and they do a great job for all the rest of us. So I leave my bucket there. I fill it up a couple of times a week at least if we're not having any rain. And if it gets to be July and August and it's 120 degrees and no rain, and you've got a tree that's only been in the ground a year or so, definitely be sure you're giving it some extra moisture if you want it to be able to thrive. So here's, again, kind of a recap of some of the things that we need to think about when we're planting a tree or a shrub. I mean, basically, shrub is exactly the same thing. It's just going to grow shorter and bushier instead of tall and skinny, but we would treat them the same way. You want to look at the location. You don't want to have one of those trees where 20 years from now or 10 years from now, it's grown up so tall that the power company comes along and cuts off half of it that faces the street, and then the other half of it faces your house. And they really look like Dr. Seuss had created those kinds of critters. Do not plant too deeply. You want that top root to be at the surface of the soil. You don't want it to be suffocating because it's too low in the soil. Also, take into consideration that mature size. If you're planting something really close to your house and it gets way too big, you're going to have an expense from fixing your siding and your roof shingles, or you're going to have an expense from having to hire an arborist to trim that tree appropriately. Think about the moisture level that will be there naturally as well. There are some trees that love to live in swampy areas, and there are some trees that are going to grow at the top of a hill. So you need to make sure that you're choosing appropriately based on that. If you're going to maintain those trees, a lot of people think, oh, it's fall, now is the time for me to go trim off any of the branches I need to get rid of. No, wait until we've had several good hard freezes. Ideally, pick a decent, nice day in February or March before the sap starts running in the springtime. If you trim in the fall, you have more of the pathogens that are still warm and active and haven't frozen yet that can get into a wound, as well as a lot of times that sap is still actively moving up and down based on the fluctuating temperatures that we have at that time of the year. So ideal time to trim would be February or March as opposed to October. Here's a little bit of an overview of some of the shrubs that I would think would work for different types of things you might want to put them into. If you're looking for something neat and tidy and has to fit in a smaller space and you don't want to have to trim it, shrubby St. John's wort is a beautiful shrub. Gets golden yellow blooms for a very long period throughout the summer. Spice bush smells wonderful, blooms little cute yellow blooms early. It gets the spice bush swallowtail caterpillars on it, which are the most funny looking little guys you'll ever see. American beautyberry is very similar in structure to spirea, and you'll get some kind of spirea-esque looking blooms in the springtime. They're not terribly prominent, but its claim to fame is the gorgeous bright fuchsia berries that it will form in the fall. And New Jersey tea is one that can take all the heat, all the sun, don't give it too much water. It wants to be really suffering and sweating it out. And that's where it likes to live, and it stays very small. So if you needed to line a sidewalk that's in bright full sun, choose New Jersey tea instead of the dying roses that are going to stab people. If you're looking for something that has multiple seasons of interest, try out 9-bark. It's got blooms, it's got berries, it's got shreddy bark, it's everything you could ask for. Blue false indigo, the Baptisia australis, is a gorgeous shrub, beautiful blue blooms in the springtime, really nice gray-green foliage throughout the summer, and then really nifty little seed pods that you can give to kids to play with, or people paint them and use them in flower arrangements, all kinds of things. Wild hydrangea is entirely different from the big snowball hydrangeas that we're used to seeing these days. To me, once I became a fan of the wild hydrangea, I see the others and they look gaudy to me. Deciduous holly has the berries that last into winter as long as you don't have enough birds to eat them up really fast. And it does not hold on to its foliage. That's what deciduous means. So the native hollies to our area do lose their foliage. If you've got a special spot that might need something extra, if you've got a wet spot where your sump pump dumps out or something like that, choose a rose mallow, a button bush. If you want a tree, choose a black gum or a bald cypress. They're really nice trees that'll love that moist area. If you've got a shady spot where you would really like to perk it up, try a wild hydrangea or a spice bush. Redbud and flowering dogwood trees are both understory trees, so they'll be happy in the shade of your larger shade trees. Something that flowers for a longer time, shrubby St. John's wort, the rose mallow. The only caveat I have of the rose mallow right now is that the silly little Japanese beetles love to eat the rose mallow. So you will have to be vigilant in shaking them off every morning if you want to get the rose mallow to be happy. Viburnum, hawthorn, tulip poplar, and black cherry, they're all great choices to get some flowering stuff going on. And they're pretty flexible in the different areas that they'll live as well. In the fall, you can't beat sumac for the bright red foliage that it has. The 9-bark will have those berry lookings and the shrubby or shreddy looking bark on it. Sassafras is my new favorite tree. That's the bloom up in the corner of the sassafras tree. They're very hard to find. Apparently last year they didn't make much seed overall, and so I can't even find them to buy them at all this year. Tulip poplar is another one that has beautiful golden foliage in the autumn. Everybody thinks about red maples, but if you've got the contrast going where you've got the red and the gold, then it just makes each of them pop out that much more strongly. And then for some really good ideas on how to take care of your trees, the top link right here goes to a PDF document that Missouri Department of Conservation has. And it's got really nice diagrams that show you exactly how deeply you should be planting that tree. And like I said, basically that all applies to shrubs as well. They're just a little bit different forms. They both have bark. They both kind of grow in the same manner. Trees Are Good has great kinds of information. I just grabbed a few of the little pamphlets such as proper mulching, pruning young trees, avoiding tree and utility conflicts, trees and turf, insect and disease problems, treatment of trees damaged by construction. A lot of people need that one. Tree values and recognizing tree risk. Those are just a few of the things that Trees Are Good has published. Great Trees for KC does no longer have a website, but they do have a Facebook page, and they have some really nice selections that are not all native, but it's experienced arborists from the area who have determined that these trees will be successful in the Kansas City area where we have all of the extremes of weather conditions, not just one or two. We wanted to go all the way and have all 4 directions. So it makes it kind of challenging for some trees. And then if you need some additional information, that's my email address down there at the bottom. I won't promise that I'll be prompt in response because I am really drowning in clients right now, but at some point I will definitely answer. So if you've got any questions, we can go ahead and work on that side of things now.
Terrific. Well, we have Catherine who asked whether or not you use a lid on your bucket and if you use the same technique for watering shrubs as you do trees.
I do not use a lid because that water is going to drain out pretty quickly. It doesn't really end up having any kind of a puddling thing in there. And it drains out quickly enough that it's not going to evaporate either. But the issue of putting the hose there and just letting it trickle really slowly, how many times have you done that and seen all that water running down the hill or running across the lawn onto the sidewalk and down into the street? This way, you know you've gotten 5 gallons in there. It's easy to measure the amount, and it's easy to know that it got in there slowly so it could really absorb deeply into the soil.
Excellent.
And yes, I use that for shrubs as well.
Very good. Thank you. Kevin would like to know, where is a good place to get pine straw?
Well, in this area of the country, it's kind of challenging to find sometimes, but I really encourage anyone who wants it to call every single nursery and ask them to carry it. Oftentimes, Suburban will have it. There's a wholesale nursery called CAT, K-A-T, that has 3, I think it is, different locations around the metro area. There's one in Blue Springs by Colonial. There's one up north off of I-21 or I-29, and there's one in, I think it's in Olathe over on the Kansas side. And they typically carry it. They used to carry it in bales that didn't have plastic wrapped around it, which was another bonus for me. Ecologically speaking, there wasn't plastic to be disposed of afterwards, but now they carry the ones that are wrapped in plastic. So it's back to that issue.
Teresa asked whether or not you wean your trees, and I suppose shrubs, off the 5-gallon bucket watering system or just stop using it cold turkey once it's established. Having a baby.
Well, they are my babies, and I would have to say it's probably a natural weaning in that once I've been dragging hose to the same one that long, usually I've got other ones that I've planted by then because, you know, you can't stop with just one. So it's probably more of a natural thing if I kind of slow off, not intentionally, not necessarily writing it down on a calendar to measure it, but yeah.
Excellent. Joan asks that her, she says, my new last year beauty bush and baptisia haven't come up yet. Have I lost them or do I just need to be patient?
Be patient. American beautyberry is one of those shrubs that is super slow, and every year you think it's not coming back. Wait till June. And if you don't see anything in June, then you can kind of dig down in there and see if there's anything green looking in there, but it's not uncommon for it to die all the way to the ground and come back totally from the roots every year.
Like a
so
phoenix.
Don't panic about that one. And the baptisia, the blue false indigo, we've had not a really warm spring yet. And plants care a lot more about the soil temperature than they do about the air temperature. So mine are just barely peeking out of the ground, and they've been in the ground for maybe 4 or 5 years-ish. So I would say definitely still be patient on those, because baptisia, they are hard to kill. Once they get established, it's hard to do anything wrong with them. They don't over baby them, and then that's probably the worst thing you could do, but otherwise they'll be good.
Very good. I actually have my own question. I have a spice bush that we probably planted 2 or 3 years ago, and I just learned that spice bushes have genders. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't know which one I have. Do you have any tips for me to figure out other than inviting you to my home?
Has it been blooming yet?
Not that I can tell.
Okay. Well, mine actually took several years before it bloomed. So don't panic about that part of it either.
Thank you.
I think it's more in the fruiting of it, whether or not it forms berries. I've never seen any of mine in any place I've lived form berries. So maybe there's a lot more males out there. But they do put out the blooms, but they don't always form the berries. I mean, the most important thing that I worry about with a spice bush is, the reason I do it is mostly for the caterpillars more than anything else. And on those caterpillars, they're a little bit different from the others. If you didn't know, they will roll a leaf up like a little taco, and they'll hide themselves inside the rolled up leaf. So you won't find them crawling along like we do the monarch caterpillars or some of the others. But the spice caterpillars, they make a little tiny bit of webbing and fold that leaf up and hide inside of there. So look for a nibbled on rolled up leaf.
I will do that. Thank you. Great tip. Jennifer asks for a suggestion of a native plant to replace a small Japanese maple, southern exposure, somewhat under a canopy that is barely, of a very large tree that has barely come back. Do you like anything in particular to replace a clearly not native Japanese maple?
You know, there's all different directions you can go with it. If you are willing to trim it into a tree form, elderberry, the foliage would be rather similar to a Japanese maple, the way the leaves are cut and have all the different tips to them. As far as size for a Japanese maple, I'm trying to think what would be best. Probably go with like a red bud or something of that nature. They, you know, unless it's one of those teeny tiny Japanese maples, there's so many different varieties of them. It's hard to know which particular size and shape and such. But check out Great Trees for KC, and they've got a lot of different pieces of advice on which things to plant where. So they'd be a good resource too. And you can always hit the Forest Keeling online catalog. I love Forest Keeling Nursery for the woody plants, and they've got an online catalog that is fantastic. So that'll help you choose as well.
Well, excellent. That actually leads us to what I think will be our last live question for the day. Diana wants to know specifically where you find a sassafras tree, but I suspect a lot of people are looking for resources and where they can find native trees that will thrive.
Well, as I just said, I mean, there's a lot of the native plant nurseries. If you go to the Deep Roots website or you go to the Grow Native website, they have a resource guide on there where you can look up different resources throughout the states. Deep Roots is focused more on Kansas City. Grow Native, we actually have a consortium of several different states now. So they will tell you if they specialize in trees. My own very personal favorite, this is not dissing anybody else, but near St. Louis is Forest Keeling Nursery. It's a multi-generational family-owned business. And they have a patented root growing method that gives you this mass of wonderful roots where you don't have to worry about a girdling root that's going to be rolling around in the pot that you need to straighten out if you're planting it. Otherwise, it'll kill your tree a few years down the road when it suffocates it.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, for all of the questions that we weren't able to get to, we will be sharing those with Paula, and at her convenience, she will help us pull those answers together, and we'll send you her expert advice. Oh, thank you again, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Paula, for sharing your expertise. We are thrilled to be hosting this series, and we have been just overwhelmed with the positive response we're getting from our attendees and from people who are willing to share their experience and their knowledge with us, like Paula. Thank you. And finally, please visit our website, deeprootskc.org. We can help you find native plants, plan a garden, and more. And if you like what you heard today and would like to support Deep Roots and our webinar series, please consider making a donation. Once again, I'm sure we have a virtual round of applause for Paula. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And everyone, please stay healthy. Cheers.